you so much to our praise team. This month marks 3 years of service for Jamie here at Gate City as our associate pastor. And if you're like me, you are really, really grateful for that. And he and his family have brought so many blessings to our church, and he's been a blessing to me personally on a variety of different levels, and this is not chief among them, but one of the great blessings is that Jamie's very technically savvy and technically gifted, and I'm grateful for that because whether it was computer stuff or it was network stuff or sound stuff, over these past few years, if we've had a problem, though, Jamie's been able to help us navigate and fix so many of those problems where we're not having to reach out to try to bring somebody in to get something taken care of. And that's a great blessing. It's a great blessing to me because before that used to be me. And so I'm glad that that's not me because sometimes I could figure it out, sometimes I couldn't. Over the past, since I've been here in 2010, up until the most recent website upgrade, what I had done is that I created and made all the changes to the website over the past whatever how many years, and it wasn't that big of a deal, but that was just something that I dealt with. And I don't know, it was a year or two ago that we made some changes to the website, and the operating system essentially that drives the website changed. And Jamie, our current website, he did that in its entirety, and I had nothing to do with it. Now, after the fact, he showed me, hey, this is how you get in here and navigate and how you make some changes and that type of thing. So if I need to post something or put something out there, I would supposedly know how to do it. Anyway, he did the same thing with Dan, and because both of us are prone to make some changes to the website. Anyway, I think I don't know, sometime this summer, we had a lot of stuff going on this past summer, and I hear Dan in his office say, I think I just crashed the website. And I go online and I look, and it's not like crashed in the sense that you can't use it, but everything is, I think the technical title is whopper-jawed. Are you familiar with whopper-jawed? And so nothing looks right. I mean, it's kind of a mess. And I didn't know how that was created. I didn't know anything. Anyway, somehow, some way, I was assuming Jamie was a part of this. It gets fixed. And so I knew that had happened. Jamie and his family went on vacation during the summer. And before he left, there were a number of things that we sat down and talked about to make sure that there were bases that I needed to ensure that I was covering during that week. And one of the things that Jamie typically would do is on Monday, like I upload the sermon video after the service on Sundays. And then on Monday mornings, typically, he would make some changes on the homepage that do something with the sermon. Anyway, I was going to be doing that. And so I made a statement, something along these lines. Well, you've showed me how to do that before, so I'm sure I'll be fine with that. All right, so Jamie goes on vacation. It's Monday morning. They've left on Saturday. And so I'm going to make these changes. And I've done everything, because in my mind, I mean, we've already reviewed this. He showed me how to do this. I've got this. I can do this. I make the changes. I press publish. And then Dan heard me ask this question. Dan, when you crashed the website, did it look something like this? And he looked and he said, yes. I said, how did you fix it? He said, I asked Jamie. And so, thankfully, it took me a little while, but somehow I was able, I don't really know what I did wrong. I don't really know what I did right, but somehow, some way, I got it fixed, and it started working an hour or two later. Anyway. All that mess I got into because I was operating with this confidence. Oh, I've never actually done that, but I'm sure I can do this. You gave me some instructions. You told me about this one time, and so I'm sure I can do this. But when it actually came time for me to do this, when we're going from theory to practice, when we're talking about going from hypothetical to reality, I really couldn't do it. With that in mind, I want you to think about this reality. We have been, and we're nearing the end of a series looking at Daniel's life. We're calling Life in Babylon, where we're thinking about some similarities, even though more than 2,000 years, thousands of years separate us from the actual experiences of Daniel. There's some great similarities, and the similarities very simply are these. He was a follower of God operating in a culture that was headed in the opposite direction, where the pressures were real and great to walk away from God and follow the drift of, the teachings of, the belief system, the practices of the culture around him. And if you have a relationship with Christ, you are experiencing the same thing today, and the heat is getting turned up. Now, you're likely aware of the fact that there are absolutely places in the world where having a commitment to Jesus is something that could potentially cost you your life. And living out a commitment to Christ could potentially put you in prison. You're aware of that. But very easily you can say, oh, we're here in the United States. That's not going to happen. And it is likely the case, and not soon, but it's not likely that that's going to change here in the United States. And so easily you could say, well, if it came to something like that, if there was real pushback, I am sure that I would be able to stand. Because of my commitment to the Lord, even though somebody's not putting a gun to my head, or somebody's not pointing towards a prison cell, or there's not some grave danger that I might be in, I'm certain, though, that if the time came, I'm certain that I would stand. But many times what occurs is that not with the threat of a gun, but even with the pressure, the encouragement from friends at school, or because of a conversation in the break room, somebody's not putting a gun to our head, but we find ourselves not standing for and with the Lord. We find ourselves just playing along and riding the drift of culture. Why does that happen? I think because many times we aren't actually prepared to stand. We just think hypothetically, I know these things and I've got these tenets straight and squared in my mind. So if and when the time comes that there is some pushback, I'm sure I'll be able to stand. But then Monday morning comes, Friday night comes, Thursday afternoon comes, and we find ourselves just going along. So the question we want to think about today, because what we see in the life of Daniel is that he helps us answer this. The question is, how can I make sure that I am ready to stand for the Lord? How can I make sure that I am ready to stand for the Lord? And guys, I'm a little hot up here with the feedback. All right, so I want you to look with me in your Bible today to Daniel chapter 6. Daniel chapter 6. We're going to pick up where we left off last week. We're not going to finish yet the whole escapade of Daniel in the lion's den, but you're going to see the continuation of this. Verse 10, Daniel chapter 6. When Daniel learned that the document had been signed, he went into his house. The window in its upstairs room opened towards Jerusalem, and 3 times a day he got down on his knees, prayed, and gave thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel petitioning and imploring his God. So they approached the king and asked about his edict. Didn't you sign an edict that for 30 days any person who petitions any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den? And the king answered, as the law of the Medes and Persians, the order stands and is irrevocable. Then they replied to the king, Daniel, one of the Judean exiles has ignored you, the king, and the edict you signed, for he prays 3 times a day. As soon as the king heard this, he was very displeased, and he set his mind on rescuing Daniel and made every effort until sundown to deliver him. Then these men went together to the king, and they said to him, You know, your majesty, that it is a law that the Medes and Persians, that no edict or ordinance the king establishes can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel, threw him into the lion's den. And the king said to Daniel, May your God, whom you continually serve, rescue you. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings of the nobles, so that nothing in regard to Daniel could be changed. All right, so here's our story, and our story helps really answer the question for us, as it did for Daniel. How can I make sure, not just hypothetically, but how can I make sure that if and when the time comes, if it's this week, if it's tomorrow afternoon, if it's on Tuesday in the break room, if it's on Thursday night on the ball field, how can I make sure that, regardless of what it is that I'm facing, I can be standing with and for the Lord? Based on what we see here, I believe there's a couple of questions that we need to ask. And in answering these questions and allowing God to help us answer these questions, it'll prepare us. And the first question is this: do I really believe what I profess? Do I really believe what I profess? All right, so that we're all on the same page, we've got Daniel is one of three chief administrators in the Medo-Persian Empire. Remember, we've gone from the Babylonians, they've been overtaken by the Medes and Persians, and a guy named Darius is the king. And so he's got a number of satraps, 120 of them, and then three administrators, of which Daniel is one of those three. And the king wants to make Daniel his number 2 guy in the entire empire. And the other administrators, the other satraps, they don't like this. Daniel's not one of us. Daniel is somebody that, he's not even one of the Babylonians that we conquered. He's one of those Hebrews that the Babylonians conquered. We don't want him having this gig. That's something that should rightfully belong to us. And so they are tired of being constantly compared to Daniel. They're tired of seeing him being the example that they are measured against. And they're thinking, we've got to do something. Somehow, some way, we've got to get rid of Daniel. And so that they start scouring the rules and the standards that he's supposed to operate in. And they find Daniel is a guy that's shot straight like an arrow. And there's nothing they can come up with. And so they come up with this idea. If we're going to somehow get rid of him, what we need to do is to cause him to choose between his commitment to God and his commitment to the king. Because we know what he's going to do. We know he's going to choose the king. We know he's going to choose God over the king. And so they go to the king and they say, you know what, Your Majesty, we've got this great idea. You know, we just conquered more people and we've got new territory. And this would really, I think, help drive home in the hearts and the minds of people that you're the one who is in charge. For an entire month, for the next 30 days, what we should do is to have a law where no one can pray or bow down to anyone or anything except, well, you. In fact, we're going to kind of make you more than king. We're going to make you like, well, God. And so if you'll sign this law, they're going to fall in line. And this will be a way to help consolidate your leadership. This is a way to reinforce that you're in charge and really to communicate to people just how great and wonderful you are. And of course, this feeds into the king's ego. And he's like, that's a pretty good idea. Like, we just happen to have a draft of this. If you sign it, then we'll be good to go. And so the king signs the law. And he puts the cap on the pen, and he's thinking, that's a pretty good law. Best thing I've signed today. For a whole month, it's going to be the month of Darius, Darianuary, whatever. Anyway, so we're going to celebrate. Well, me. And so he's thinking this is so great, but his enemies, Daniel's enemies, know that they have got the trap set. And what do they do at this point? They go to Daniel's house. And they're lurking around, and they want to see exactly what he's going to do. Because a law such as this, it's going to have a start date, it's going to have a finish date, and this would have been heralded throughout the empire. There would have been messengers going from town to town, city to city, village to village. I'm sure there would have been postings in all sorts of public places so that everyone knew from this date to that date, there's no prayers except to the king. You bow down only towards and to the king. You call out, you pray out only to the king. He's more than our king. He's the one to whom we should even pray. And so they go to Daniel's house to see, wonder what he's going to do. And what they discover is, as this law has been passed, Daniel is aware of what the law is. What we see in this passage is not at all Daniel operating in ignorance. He's operating intentionally. The law says to pray to the king. But God says, you'll have no other gods before me. And so there's a collision between these two. And so what does Daniel pray? And to who does Daniel pray? He prays to God. Not once, not twice, but 3 times a day. Because that's what he does. And his enemies, they're so glad. They're so elated that they've got him. They're trapped. They have said it, it has worked, and it's wonderful because they knew and they were confident with respect to Daniel. If the choice was between obeying the king and obeying God, he was going to obey the Lord. Now, certainly it is the case, and the Bible makes plain for us that it is God who has established both kings and kingdoms, and he's done so as a way, the Bible says, to restrain evil and to reward good. And it is our obligation and our responsibilities not simply as citizens of heaven, but as followers of God in this world, that we're supposed to obey the laws, whether we like the laws or not. But what happens when those boundaries, when those laws, when those commandments are at odds with what God has told us to do? Well, our obligation is to pay attention to and to heed the higher authority, the higher law. And God's law always trumps local, state, national, international. It trumps everything if it is that we take seriously the prospect of following Him. And so when the choice for Daniel is between doing what the king has said and doing what God has said, Daniel decides, I'm going to do what God has said. Because of this. I really believe that God is. I believe, and I really believe, that He's the only one who is God. I believe and really believe He's the only one that I will ultimately stand before. I believe and really believe that He is not going to just hold me, but He's going to hold everyone, even this king and even these other administrators and satraps. I believe that He's going to hold all of us accountable to Him, and so I'm going to act accordingly. What I'm saying to you, it is not merely that Daniel had a number of facts straight in his mind, that he was aware of the commandments, and that he was aware of the statutes, and that he was aware of the boundaries, but he really believed it. Believed it to the point where he was willing to act on it. It's not merely that he had profession, but he really, genuinely believe this. Really, sincerely, thoroughly believing is a requirement, I believe, to successfully standing. Why would I say that? Let me illustrate it this way. When I was in high school, I've told to you about this before though, but I served as an umpire, worked as an umpire in some church league baseball games. And so I umpired T-ball and coach pitch. T-ball is pretty simple. I mean, there's not a whole lot to do. You just need to count the number of outs, and there's not many close plays. A lot of times you'll have a little kid that's playing T-ball. They might hit the ball and run straight to second, or they may go to third. You never know. You might have somebody using the bathroom in the outfield. I mean, honestly, that happens in a T-ball game. With coach pitch, it gets a little more serious, and the kids physically they've got better motor skills, and they are capable of playing better. And even though the coach is actually pitching, it's 3 strikes and you're out. And there's plays at first and second and third and at home that are markedly closer. You got kids that are really trying, and so the plays were much closer, and that meant that my job as an umpire was increasingly important, and it was much more serious than it had been. And I knew it then, and I especially know it today. I was a terrible umpire. I really was. Because I would see something, and there would be a play at first, especially first and third, because that's where you'd have the base coaches. And at first and third, so I would see the ball go to the glove of the first baseman. I would see the runner, their foot hitting the base, and I would know that one of them got there first. Wonder which one it was. And I'm kind of playing it through in my mind. But again, you've got a base coach over there. So the guy that's up to bat, somebody representing his team is over there telling him whether to go or not. And so I hate this, but regularly this happened. A base coach would be over there, and what's the base coach going to do? Safe. You know what Michael might say? Safe. I got chewed out all the time. I mean, nobody was happy with me. They really were. I mean, and multiple times I had to threaten, we're just going to call the whole game. Both teams are going to forfeit if you don't leave me alone. You've got to be quiet. I don't know, I'm 16, 17 years old, and I'm just getting railed by all of these angry parents because they know what I know, and that's that I'm a terrible umpire. And do you know why I was such a terrible umpire? I would see it, and I would think, I believe that runner's safe, but, I don't know. I don't know. But if you're certain, that makes it a lot easier, doesn't it? You're like, I don't care what you say. I saw that, and I know that runner is safe, or I know that runner is out. Certainty is a requirement. Surety is a requirement for being able to stand. And if there are doubts in your mind, if there is a lack of confidence in your mind that what we read in the pages of this is actual truth, I'm telling you that you are not prepared to stand. I'm telling you that when there is pressure from culture, and it won't take much, you're going to follow what culture says. When you have, whether it's a teacher in a classroom, whether it's a reporter that you see on TV, whether it's a principal that you see in a movie, if it's a friend that's encouraging that this is right and that is not, and that this is in bounds and that's not, even though that contradicts what God has said, you're going to follow the drift of culture unless you believe, and I mean really believe, that what God has said is actually truth. Do I really believe what I profess? I don't mean hypothetically. I mean, do I know with certainty that there are some things that are just plain true? That there is a God who exists, who has made everything by His creative power, who has given to me and He's given to all of us this standard by which He's holding us accountable. Do I believe, and I mean really believe, that apart from Jesus, there is no way that we experience forgiveness of sins, eternal life, and a relationship with God? Do I really believe that? Do I believe that God has made me as a person with a plan and purpose, and that there are standards that I should not violate, that are written even on my heart? Do I believe that there are sexual standards that God has said this is in bounds and that's out of bounds, regardless of what a Supreme Court says, regardless of what a teacher says, regardless of what a book says? What did God say about it? I'm telling you, you are going to be sailing right along with the drift of culture unless you can successfully answer this question. Do I really, really believe what I profess? Answer that question. Ask God to help you to answer, do I really, really believe this? Second question you need to answer is this: can I stand attractively? It's my favorite sermon point I've ever put out there. Can I stand? Of course I can. I'm doing it right. Anyway. Can I stand attractively? What exactly does that mean? Pay attention to what's going on here in this passage. Medo-Persian law had no amendment process. And once a law was enacted, that's how it was. The law says for 30 days you pray only to the king, and violation of that gets you tossed into the lion's den, death by being eaten by a lion. That's what the law is. The king has signed it. It's official. It can't be changed. The king knows that. Daniel knows that. The other administrators, the satraps, know it. And in fact, Daniel's enemies, they're just ecstatic because they know we've got our guy now. So they have heard him praying out to his God, not once, not twice, but 3 times a day. And so they go to the king and they say, didn't you sign, this is verse 12, didn't you sign an edict that for 30 days any person who petitions any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown in the lion's den? Just making sure, my memory, sometimes I forget stuff, but didn't you sign a law that says this? And the king says, yes, as the law of the Medes and Persians, the order stands and is irrevocable. You can imagine they're like, yes. Oh, it's all coming back to me now. And so they say, well, Your Majesty, Daniel, right? We know you know Daniel. You've talked a lot about him. He's one of those, and you can hear the contempt, one of those Judean exiles. One of those not one of us people. He's ignored you, and he prays 3 times a day, and we've heard it. A whole group of us have heard it. We've observed it. We know that it's happened, and it didn't just happen once, but it happened 3 times on the day that the law went into effect. Verse 14, as soon as the king heard this, he was displeased. Why is he displeased? Is it because this is now an affront to him and that Daniel has shown disrespect? No, I think ultimately the displeasure is because he realizes, I've been snookered. This was a plan. This was a trap. Let me see if I can figure out some way to get Daniel out of this. Because we're told he set his mind on rescuing Daniel and made every effort until sundown to deliver him. And so you've got to think, he's got aides that are saying, hey, look in the law book, see if there is something, there's a loophole somewhere, there's something that I might be able to do, there's a magic wand that I can wave, there's some new law that I could sign, there's something that I could do with, a hand gesture, something, somehow, some way to revoke this law. And for the remainder of the day, he spent his time doing this. And at the end of the day, they come back to him, these are Daniel's opponents, and they say, you know, Your Majesty, this law of the Medes and Persians says that no edict or ordinance can be changed. And the king realizes, I've got nothing else that I can do. I've tried everything I can do. And notice what he says in verse 16. As Daniel is being tossed into the lion's den, does he say, that'll show you? No, he says, may your God, whom you continually serve, rescue you. What does this tell us? I believe it tells us something significant about Daniel. One of the things is that it communicates to us that Daniel was a guy, and it's believed he's roughly 80, 82 years old at this point, that anyone who had any encounter with Daniel for any period of time, they came to realize this is a guy that knows and walks with God. It's not because he had a fish on the back of his camel. It's not because he had a honk if you love Jesus t-shirt. It's not because he had any of that. But because he was just a steady, consistent follower and sharer about God. I don't think he sought to beat people over the head. I don't believe that he tried to instigate with people. He was just living out, not in secret, but living out with consistency, his relationship with God. And anybody and everyone that came in contact with Daniel over any period of time, they came to know that. And whether they agreed with Daniel's positions, whether they accepted his faith, and whether it was or not that they followed his God, he wasn't going to change. This is who he was. They knew that he had these beliefs, that he took them seriously. But notice this. He had these beliefs, he took them seriously, and he lived them out in such a way that people still liked him. Is Darius a believer? No, this is a pagan king. Is this a guy that is joining Daniel for prayer time and say, hey, let me get in on this? No, this is a guy that is completely disconnected, has no relationship with God. He is not a follower of the Lord at all, like Daniel. And what is he doing? He's trying to figure out a way to rescue his friend. He's trying to figure out a way that he can save this guy that he feels very affably and positively towards. Does he, at this point, share Daniel's convictions? He doesn't. Is Darius a believer? No, he's not. But what does this tell us? It tells us that Daniel was a man that stood for God in a culture that was headed in the opposite direction, and the manner in which he did it was done in such a way that it positively pointed other people to the Lord. Notice what Darius says. May your God, whom you continually serve, rescue you. That's not a complete, bold declaration of faith, but it sure is positive, isn't it? You've got this guy that doesn't know and walk with God saying, I sure hope this one that you clearly know, that you follow and that you pray to, I sure hope he does something to save you, because I can't. This tells us about Daniel's relationship with the Lord and how it was that he lived it out. He lived it out in ways that were attractive. By that I mean he was not intentionally seeking to instigate and just prod and poke and anger and just wave his fist at people and say, oh, you bunch of hell-bound infidels. He's not operating that way. He's with grace and kindness, with civility, operating with his commitment to God in such a way that it attractively presents a relationship with God. Since the Queen's death, it's possible that more than a few of you have been watching more than a little bit of TV about her passing, and I guess tomorrow is her funeral, and I'm sure there's more than a couple of you that'll be watching that. I'm not like a huge royal fan or anything, but I'm kind of intrigued by it. I like all the pageantry of it. And in truth, I really love to hear a British accent. I do. And I wish, I'm grateful for American freedom, but I wish we'd kept the accent. Don't you? Anyway, I have always, and I love to hear, especially little British kids. It's just funny to hear how, it's such a, it sounds so nice. It is so lovely how it is that British accent, I just like it. Anyway, I believe it was after the birth of Catherine. I was with Caroline and Catherine in the hospital, and of course the pediatrician is going to round after the baby is born, and there were a number of doctors in that group who, and they take turns being on call, and so it wasn't our physician that came, but another doctor in that practice, and it was a doctor that we'd met before. It was a lady, and we really liked her, and she was from London and had this lovely, lovely, lovely British accent, and she came in, she just had an easy, affable way. We're enjoying talking to her, and one of the statements I made while she was there was this. I said, I just love to hear you talk. And I said, I really believe that you could take for one thing, it makes you sound so smart. You notice that? British people sound smarter. They just do. And I said, you could take the dumbest Brit. Just pick a dumb one, right? And have them say something and have the average American say it that's markedly smarter, but it sounds so much smarter being said with that accent. And she laughed and she said, you're right. She said also this. It doesn't sound as dirty when we cuss. And I thought, she's right. No, I'm not encouraging you to sit there. Some of you now are practicing. But she was correct, though. And what's interesting about that is this. You could take, and listen, I'm not encouraging you to engage in talk in ways we shouldn't. I'm not saying that. Here's the point, though. Based on what she's saying, you could take something and say it to someone that otherwise would be offensive. The content could be offensive, but it's not. Why? Because of how it's delivered. Do you see the parallel here with Daniel? This absolutely could be offensive, the manner in which, or the fact that he is a follower of God, and that God has standards that he's going to toe the line on, even if the king doesn't, even if the king doesn't like it, even if the satraps, the other administrators, even if none of them like it, he's going to toe the line, and he could wave his fist at them, and he could say, you bunch of hell-bound infidels. He could be doing that, but he's not. He's not. He's living out his commitment to the Lord, communicating to others in ways about his relationship with God that are best described this way. They're attractive. They're attractive. So that even the king is saying things like this. May your God, whom you continually serve, rescue you. It's not just simply that Daniel is standing, but he was prepared to stand. It wasn't merely because he knew what he believed, but he really believed it. And as he lived out those beliefs, he did so in ways that positively pointed to the one in whom he believed. Daniel was a guy that was ready to stand. My question is, based on these questions, are you? Will you bow your heads with me?